Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. It was supposed to be just another normal high school rager at my house while my parents were away for the weekend on one of their business trips. But things took a really chilling turn in the wee hours of the night when everyone had left the party, but I realized someone or some sinister creature still seemed to be lurking right outside in the darkness. I'll never forget huddling in frozen terror in my room, listening to those ominous animalistic noises floating up from the backyard, unsure if I was being stalked by a human intruder or some deranged beast. Like most weekends when my parents went out of town, I jumped at the chance to have a bunch of friends over to let loose and party without any supervision. We were just a bunch of rambunctious 16-year-olds looking for any excuse to go wild and goof off with no adults around. I invited some kids from school over to swing our pool, play loud music, raid the pantry, and basically trash the place worry-free. The party started off just as fun and rowdy as expected. We cranked up my stereo playing punk rock and hip-hop. We played drunken games like Marco Polo in the pool, and sang along loudly and terribly to our favorite angsty pop songs. For a bunch of goody-good honor roll kids, it felt thrilling and liberating to get as wild as we wanted away from our parents' watchful eyes for once. As the night wore on, things started fizzling out around midnight when people got bored and hungry. By 1 a.m., the last few stragglers had cleared out after we polished off all the Doritos and soda in the house. Before going to bed, I did a quick half-hearted sweep of the house, picking up stray empty cups and wiping down counters to try to cover at least some of my party tracks. With all the drunken guests gone, the house quickly fell into an eerie quiet stillness. The blaring music and rowdy laughter from hours before already seemed like a distant memory now, as if it was just another normal quiet night and no one had been over at all. Just as I finally crawled exhausted into bed, I thought I faintly heard a heavy thudding sound somewhere right outside my open bedroom window. Figuring it was probably just a raccoon or a possum rooting through our trash cans out front, I tried ignoring it and falling asleep. But then a few minutes later, I heard an odd, guttural grunting noise followed by heavy breathing sounds floating up from the backyard area. The noises were too deep and guttural to be any small animal I could think of. My skin immediately prickled with unease. We didn't have any large dogs or pets capable of making noises like that. Plus, whatever was out there sounded way too big to be a raccoon or a skunk checking our trash. As the thing let out more odd moans and sniffles, I felt the hairs on my neck stand straight up. My terrified imagination was running wild, envisioning some deranged murderer or drifter hiding in our yard, peering up at my darkened bedroom window as they waited to strike. Gripped by fear, I couldn't just call the cops to check out the situation without also alerting my parents that I'd thrown a party. So instead I laid there paralyzed, listening to those increasingly loud, eerie noises drifting up from directly below. After what felt like hours of this but was realistically only about 15 minutes max, I couldn't take it anymore. I desperately grabbed my dad's heavy-duty flashlight from my nightstand drawer and shone the beam out into the backyard, ready to face my fears head-on and confront whatever was making those spine-chilling noises. But the bright flashlight illuminated only empty, silent darkness in the yard. Yet somehow, almost as soon as I flicked off the flashlight, the odd grunting and breathing sounds resumed, now even closer and clearer than before. My hands trembled violently and tears streamed down my cheeks as I stood there frozen, unsure what to do next. I felt totally helpless, trapped between wanting to flee the house screaming and also not wanting to anger or provoke this ominous presence by making a sudden move. Was I losing my mind, or was there seriously someone, or something, sinister truly lurking right below my bedroom window making those ghastly noises? The longer I stood there straining to listen, the more inhuman the sounds seemed to my innocent ears. This didn't sound like any human intruder I could envision in my mind. No person could naturally make those chillingly guttural grunts and growls. I ended up hiding and huddling in pure terrified silence in the corner by my closet, clutching my dad's baseball bat tight to my chest, waiting for the sun to rise. Exhaustion eventually overtook me, and I uneasily fell into a fitful sleep still holding the bat, listening all night for the creature to creep closer. At the first light of dawn, I finally mustered the courage to slowly crawl out of bed and tiptoe back to the window to peek outside. I half expected to see a mutilated dead body sprawled across our lawn or something equally horrific. But in the gray morning light, the backyard below looked totally normal and empty, except for a few stray crushed beer cans and damp towels forgotten by the pool after the party. The next night, I convinced a friend to casually sleep over so I wouldn't have to be home alone again. Once it hit midnight, we sat anxiously in my room with all the lights on, waiting. And sure enough, around 2 a.m., those same eerie noises again started drifting up from directly below my window in the backyard. Distant at first, but gradually getting louder and closer before fading away again. The grunts and growls were definitely not human. My friend heard them clearly too, and we frantically shone flashlights out into the woods together. But the beams caught nothing real except shadows and swaying trees. Still, the creature seemed to retreat deeper into the dark woods whenever we made it obvious we were listening and watching for it. I remember one Halloween night when I kept hearing persistent knocking at my front door, but each time I checked there was mysteriously no one there. At first, I thought it must be a group of kids trying to prank me post-trick-or-treating, but what happened when I finally tried to sneak up and catch them in the act still gives me chills to this day. As a 20-something living alone at the time in my small starter home, I always looked forward to Halloween. I'd excitedly buy piles of candy and decorate my little house with fake cobwebs, skeletons, jack-o'-lanterns, and ghostly lights to happily hand out treats to all the eager trick-or-treaters that stopped by all evening. Seeing how creative and cute the kids' costumes were year after year, from tiny toddler superheroes to groups of silly tweens, never failed to put a big nostalgic smile on my face. I always try to make my house the best decorated on the block to give the neighborhood families a memorable Halloween. That particular Halloween night a few years back had been an especially busy and festive one at my house. I must have gone through 10 whole bags of candy with a constant stream of costumed kids and their patient parents stopping by for treats. As the clock approached 9 o'clock, the visits gradually died down as most of the young ones headed home to start winding down and get ready for bed. I turned off my outdoor decorative lights and collapsed exhausted onto the couch, glad the rush was over but also a little sad it was all over for the year. The house suddenly felt so quiet without the laughter of children outside. As I started drifting off into a candy coma, I thought I faintly heard a light knocking sound at my front door. Figuring a straggler or two must be stopping by late hoping for any last leftover candy, I dragged myself up from the couch and grabbed the large bowl of sweets I had set aside. But when I swung open the front door, ready to greet the late trick-or-treaters, no one was there. My darkened front yard was empty and silent except for dead leaves skittering across the sidewalk. I shrugged it off, assuming it must have just been some bold teenagers pulling a classic ding-dong ditch prank on the home still decorated for the holiday. I shut the door feeling more sleepy than annoyed and soon forgot about it as I tidied up the party mess and got ready for bed. But then 15 minutes later, 3 more quick knocks echoed from my front door. Feeling puzzled now, I marched back over, ready to get to the bottom of who was pranking my house this late on Halloween. I whipped open the door, fully expecting to catch a fleeing, giggling teen in a mask sprinting into the night. But again, only vacant darkness and silence awaited on my porch. By now, all the streets were totally empty and most houses were darkened and quiet for the night. It seemed even the older kids had called it quits after a long night of mischief and mayhem. I stood there scratching my head, feeling confused and unnerved even though I tried to brush it off again. I locked the front door and reminded myself some mischievous kids were probably just getting their last in adults' expense. Back inside, I double-checked the locks, turned off all the lights, and climbed into bed, reasoning I was just being paranoid for no reason. But the odd sporadic knocks persisted at random intervals, never letting me fully relax into sleep. And each time I forced myself to get back up and check, my darkened front yard remained eerily empty and undisturbed. After this bizarre, unsettling scene played out 5 more times over the next hour, I finally decided enough was enough. Clearly just ignoring it and going back to bed was not going to make this stop. Next time the knocking started up again, I decided I would try to definitively catch whoever was doing this in the act. I grabbed my flashlight and pressed myself flat against the living room wall, right next to the front door, ready to rip it wide open and expose the juvenile pranksters in the beam of light. I waited silently in the dark, muscles tense, goal driven now to identify the culprits and tell them off for ruining my sleep. 20 long minutes crawled by in stillness. Just as I was certain the prank must be over for the night, 3 slow, deliberate knocks broke the silence from the front door area. I felt my adrenaline surge in anticipation. Before I could psych myself out, I swiftly threw open the door, flashlight raised and ready. But instead of illuminating mischievous faces, the bright beam hit only empty darkness yet again. I leaped outside onto the front steps, head whipping left and right, beam frantically scouring the yard and street for any culprits. The pranksters couldn't possibly have made it off my front porch that fast, but not a single sound or figure disturbed the heavy night. It was like the knocking had manifested from thin air. A profound unease settled in the pit of my stomach as I tried vainly to rationalize any logical human explanation for what I had just witnessed. No kids hiding around the side of the house, no cars speeding off down the street. In the split second between the knock starting and me throwing open the door, the night had remained still as a painting. No fleeing footsteps, no stifled giggles, no sign whatsoever of physical bodies having just been there seconds before producing those strange sounds. It simply did not add up. Despite feeling deeply unsettled now, I attempted to shrug it off as some bizarre auditory illusion. Back inside, I made sure to double-check that all doors and windows were still securely locked up tight for the night, but deep down I knew locks would not keep out whatever entity was producing the inexplicable knocks on my door if it was something inhuman. I barely slept a wink that night as the odd knocking persisted at random intervals until dawn finally crept in, always revealing nothing and no one there when I checked. To this day, years later, I still have no rational explanation for what bizarre forces were toying with me that strange night after Halloween. I'll never forget the absolutely terrifying incident that happened one morning when I was home alone as a kid and thought I clearly heard my mom calling me from downstairs. Just thinking about that disembodied voice gives me chills to this day, and the sheer horror I felt in that moment realizing there was no possible way it could actually be my mom. I must have been around 11 years old at the time. I was off from school for some random teacher work day. My mom had an important last-minute meeting come up at her office that particular day, so I had stayed home alone most of the morning and afternoon until she was done with work and could come pick me up. We lived in a modest little 2-story house together in the quiet suburbs. It was normally peaceful and predictable, but that day, something happened that shook my world and distorted my sense of reality forever. That morning had started out completely normal and even a little bit boring with having the whole house to myself. I ate a bowl of cereal and watched some cartoons in the living room for a couple hours. Eventually, I settled in at the kitchen table to half-heartedly work on some homework assignments. Around noon, I started feeling kind of restless and lonely just hanging around the house by myself all day. I decided to go read my new library book upstairs in the cozy reading nook I had set up in my bedroom. I remember I had just settled very comfortably into my beanbag chair in the little reading corner, totally engrossed in the story, when I very clearly heard a woman's voice calling out, "Abby, come help me get the groceries from the car." The voice sounded exactly like my mom's, same gentle vocal tone, same sing-song lilt, same affectionate nickname she always used for me. Just hearing it instantly gave me that knee-jerk sense of comfort and familiarity I associated with her presence. Without thinking twice, I marked my page and hopped up from the beanbag chair, heading downstairs to come help as she asked. "I'm coming." I yelled back enthusiastically, feeling grateful to take a break from my book and hang out with Mom instead while we put away groceries together. But as I reached the bottom of the steps and rounded the corner into the living room, an icy cold chill ran all through my body, raising goosebumps on my arms. I suddenly remembered with horror that my mom wasn't even supposed to be home from work for a few more hours. I was completely alone in the house. She definitely could not be here calling me from the kitchen right now like I had reflexively assumed. I froze in my tracks, listening closely for any other sounds. But an eerie, heavy silence had now fallen over the house, replacing the friendly voice from just seconds earlier. You could have heard a pin drop. "Mom." I hesitantly whispered out into the stillness. No response at all. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. The unfinished cereal bowl still sat exactly where I had left it on the kitchen table much earlier that morning. My mom's home office room was empty too, her car still gone from the driveway outside. Growing increasingly frightened, I began frantically searching every room, even peeking into closets and scoping out the basement just in case. But nothing was disturbed or out of place. All the doors were still locked tight from the inside, just as I had left them. I was completely and utterly alone in the house. At that moment, hearing my mom's familiar, loving voice speak to me so clearly when in reality the house lay totally empty felt like the creepiest, most terrifying violation I could possibly imagine as a kid. I pictured some evil presence or disturbed intruder cruelly mimicking her voice to try and lure me towards some unseen danger. My mind raced imagining all kinds of horrific possibilities. I ended up locking myself alone in my bedroom, using every muscle I had to show my dresser in front of the door to barricade it shut until my real mom finally got home. But I never told her what happened. Even at that age, I knew she'd insist it must have just been my overactive imagination conjuring things. Maybe I had started dozing off while reading she would rationalize. But deep down I was certain in my core some kind of malignant entity had spoken to me that day while posing as my mother. Its phantom voice continued echoing in my head for weeks after the incident whenever I was alone, ensuring I'd never forget. Our neighborhood was pretty new at the time, and something about the land there always gave me odd vibes even before this happened. I wondered if it held ancient remnants of past wrongs and injustices that my child mind could never fully grasp. Or maybe my own lonely, bored psyche had somehow conjured this messed up auditory hallucination of an imposter mom from the darkest fairy tales. Either way, the bizarre traumatic experience really shook my sense of reality to the core at that vulnerable age. The comfort and unconditional love I associated with my real mom's voice became tainted by the unsettling possibility that anything safe and familiar could unexpectedly transform into a facade for deceit and sinister unseen forces waiting to claim me if I let my guard down. I started to view the world itself as a fragile illusion that we foolishly cling to and invest belief in, when in fact it was haunted by the shadows of chaos and darkness, always encroaching just out of sight, existing parallel to everything I knew was normal. We ended up moving away from that house not long after, which I was quietly relieved by. I think even my mom could sense the presence of lingering bad memories there that we needed to shed and leave behind for a fresh start. But the chilling existential unease awakened in me by the experience continued simmering within, even once removed from the physical home where it occurred. Because once you personally accept as a child that true darkness actually can inexplicably and randomly seep into the light of your reality unbidden, you can never look at life and existence itself through quite the same innocent, trusting lens again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.